today we're taking steps to confront not just the gun crisis, but what is actually a public health crisis.
The urgent need to address the gun violence epidemic in America.
The CDC is speaking up about America's gun violence epidemic.
There is an epidemic in this country.
Every week, nearly 13 mass shootings.
It reaches us at home.
It was another devastating weekend of mass shootings.
At work.
If I didn't have my firearm, I wouldn't be here today. I know that for a fact. I would not be here today. My family would be planning my funeral.
Now, Grove tells me he has been deactivated as an Amazon delivery driver.
And even at school. While real solutions are ignored by government, the epidemic spreads.
I'm excited today because for a long time now I have wanted to reinstate the assault weapon ban.
I think we should have a ban on assault weapons.
Banning deadly assault weapons saves lives.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now.
And one day, it will be at your doorstep.
20 heavily armed IRS and ATF agents raid Great Falls, Montana gun store.
Our government is out of control.
In that regard, I think it's time to talk about the absoluteness of the discussion on the current court actions that suggest that the Second Amendment is an absolute right and none of the others are.
Whereas, to preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole of the body of the people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. Nor does it follow from this that all promiscuously must go into actual service on every occasion. The mind that aims at a select militia must be influenced by a truly anti-Republican principle. And when we see many men disposed to practice upon it, whenever they can prevail, no wonder true Republicans are for carefully guarding against it. Richard Henry Lee, The Pennsylvania Gazette, February 20, 1788. The Constitution is clear, shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment draws roots in England, where all able-bodied males were a part of the King's army. King Henry II proclaimed an assize of arms in 1181. This required all able-bodied males to keep the implements of war. Men were required to purchase swords, armor, and even horses depending upon their economic status. The king would call his militia to inspection every year to check for battle readiness and discipline. King Henry III, and later the entire Edward dynasty, continued expanding the militia, even banning sports so citizens had more time to practice with their weapons. The right and duty to possess the most technologically advanced weaponry was practiced in English culture 600 years before the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. The whole of the Bill of Rights is a declaration of the right of the people at large or considered as individuals. It establishes some rights of the individual as unalienable and which, consequently, no majority has a right to deprive them of. Albert Gallatin to Alexander Addison, October 7, 1789. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. What did the founders mean by a well-regulated militia? Did they want the militia to be well-regulated by government? Or did they mean something entirely different? The term well-regulated had been in common use long before the ratification of the Constitution, and remained so for a century after. In the context of 1789, well-regulated means in proper working order, keeping with centuries of tradition. So who is the militia? Is it the National Guard? I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. George Mason, co-author of the Second Amendment. Addressed to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, June 4, 1788. A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves. Richard Henry Lee, Federal Farmer to the Republic, Letter 18, May 1788. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the best and most natural defense of a free country. James Madison, 4th U.S. President. First Annals of Congress, 434, June 8, 1789. Who are the militia? Are they not ourselves? Is it feared, then, that we shall turn our arms, each man gainst his own bosom? Congress have no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. The unlimited power of the sword is not in the hands of either the federal or state governments, but, where I trust in God it will ever remain, in the hands of the people. Tench Cox, The Pennsylvania Gazette, February 20, 1788. These are the words of the founders themselves. These are the statements they made during the Constitutional Convention. They clearly explain the intentions behind every word of the Second Amendment. The topic of the Second Amendment is well-regulated militia. The purpose is being necessary for the security of a free state. The enumeration of individual right is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And the limitation on government is shall not be infringed. Therefore, we can say with 100% certainty that the Second Amendment is an individual right, and its clauses prevent the government from any limitation or infringement upon it. The biggest driver of the anti-rights movement is the idea that gun violence has become an epidemic, and that random acts of gun violence are increasing exponentially.
96 people die every day from guns in our country.
But is that true? Are Americans increasingly becoming victims of random acts of gun violence?
But what's clear, as the president has said, is that we are suffering from an epidemic of gun violence in this country.
According to the CDC, from 2001 to 2021, 728,000 people had fallen victim to firearms. The total deaths over the last 20 years equals 11.17 persons per 100,000, or a crude death rate percentage of 0.0112%, less than 0.1%.
I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America.
Upon further examination, we see that gun violence is hardly random at all. In fact, over 58% of firearm deaths are self-inflicted and isolated.
The scope of the problem is just bigger than we're even hearing about. And when your heart wrenches every day, you turn on the news, you're only hearing the tip of the iceberg.
If we also remove accidents, legal intervention, and undetermined, which do not fit the criteria of criminal violence, we are left with homicides at 37.73% of total deaths by firearm. CDC data shows that 4.22 persons per 100,000 have fallen victim to gun violence on average over the last 20 years, or 0.0042%. Anti-rights activists have repeated the narrative that gun violence is increasing.
How many ways can we say it? Gun violence does not discriminate. It happens everywhere and all the time.
Looking at CDC data from 1999, we see stagnation with crude rate deaths per 100,000 hovering between 3.5 and 4.5 annually. Would you consider 0.0042% a disproportionately large number of individuals within a population? Is gun violence excessively prevalent when it does not rank in the top 10 causes of early death? Can we classify gun violence as exhibiting widespread growth or extent when over the last 20 years it has remained at a verifiably consistent rate? If you're an honest person, the answer to those three questions is
no, no, no.
If the founders were clear on the intentions of the Second Amendment, and data shows gun violence does not meet the definition of epidemic, why is so much effort spent on unconstitutionally and baselessly disarming the American population?
For a long time now, I have wanted to reinstate the assault weapon ban.
After the ban went into effect, 1994, the numbers proved the obvious.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
So effective immediately, no person other than a law enforcement officer or licensed security officer shall possess a firearm, either openly or concealed.
It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all.
Your guess is as good as ours. Regardless of their intentions, misrepresenting reality puts us farther away from a solution to violence and suicide.
Ending incidents like the one in Uvalde is obviously important, but there would still be more than 100 gun deaths a day on average in the United States, most of them people taking their own lives.
The answer is simple yet complex. Culture. Our culture has soured.
There has been a 33% increase in diagnoses. The report estimates more than 9 million insured Americans suffer from depression.
Hopelessness, ignorance, indulgence, hedonism, and selfishness have led to an exponentially increasing societal rot. Taking the weapon from the hands does not restore the spiritual decay in the soul. We could burn all the firearms tomorrow, and you wouldn't be any safer from the dark side of man today. The once happy and peaceful plains of America are either to be drenched in blood or inhabited by slaves. Sad alternative, but can a virtuous man hesitate in his choice? George Washington. The only epidemic in this country is the destruction of our foundation. Why does every leader we have want to take from us? Our history, our monuments, our sovereignty, our treasure, and our fundamental inalienable rights. I call upon you, righteous men of war, do not let them snatch the precious jewel of liberty.